This is not the time for war, said Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he held talks with Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer during his two-day visit to Austria. In fact, this is just a day after he held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on business and economy issues and, of course, on issues of regional importance. Now, remember, this Austria visit is a first by an Indian Prime Minister in over 40 years, 41 to be precise, and this visit coincides with the 75th year of India-Austria ties. In fact, both the leaders met with CEOs of at least 40 Indian and Austrian companies and spoke about expanding the bilateral cooperation. The Prime Minister then apprised the business community of the opportunity India presents as it moves to become the world's third largest economy and has immense ease of doing business. In fact, right before the talks, the Prime Minister also received a ceremonial guard of honor at the Federal Chancellery in Vienna. But one wonders, where does Austria really figure in India's foreign policy? We'll discuss that with our guests tonight, but let's first hear what Prime Minister had to say this morning after his bilateral.
मैंने और चांसलर नेहमर ने विश्व में चल रहे विवादों, चाहे यूक्रेन में संघर्ष हो या पश्चिम एशिया की स्थिति, सभी पर विस्तार में बात की है। मैंने पहले भी कहा है कि यह युद्ध का समय नहीं है। समस्याओं का समाधान रणभूमि में नहीं हो सकता। कहीं भी हो, मासूम लोगों की जान की हानि स्वीकार्य नहीं है। भारत और ऑस्ट्रिया शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली के लिए डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी पर बल देते हैं। इसके लिए हम दोनों मिलकर हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार हैं।
All right, so the Prime Minister, right after his bilateral, speaking about India-Austria ties, also speaking very vehemently against terrorism and also saying that peace is the only solution to any kind of war playing out, and killing of innocent people is definitely unacceptable. Let's take this discussion forward with our guests tonight. Well, Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States and Germany, is joining us. Also joining us is Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar. Thank you, Ms. Shankar and Mr. Sajjanhar, for joining us this evening. I want to first ask you about, this is this, of course, is part of India's outreach to alpine countries. But do help us understand the relevance of this visit, especially as it comes right after the Prime Minister assumed office for the third time and after his Russia visit. So this happens to be the second bilateral that India has done. Ambassador Shankar, we'll come to you first and then to Mr. Sajjanhar.
Well, firstly, let me say it was the 75th year of India-Austria relations. And these relations have traditionally been one of trust, as both prime ministers mentioned in their statement. In fact, post the Second World War, I think India played a constructive role for Austria in intervening with the Soviet Union to accept Austria's independence. And the Treaty of Austria was signed in 1955. So that's a constructive role that India played. And of course, Austria has a unique position because it sits really astride the conflict in Europe between the Eastern Bloc initially and the Western Bloc, and today between Russia and NATO. So Austria has traditionally been neutral, and that was a condition that was set when it became independent. And though it has a European position on the Ukraine conflict, I think it still has a more nuanced position at some level. And Chancellor Nehammer said that he wanted to get India's assessment of Ukraine and also explain to India, Europe's perspective on Ukraine. So obviously, the Ukraine conflict figured very largely in their discussions. And Prime Minister reiterated India's stance that this is not an era of war, and military dominance in the battlefield is not going to be the way to seek resolution and an end to these conflicts. Both countries agreed to support efforts for dialogue and diplomacy in Ukraine. And they also discussed the conflict in Gaza, which has become more intense with Israeli military action in the cities of Gaza. So these geopolitical developments, I think, figured quite large, but the bilateral agenda was also touched upon. And both countries have agreed to try to strengthen their economic cooperation, particularly in areas like railways.
Absolutely, and a lot has happened on that, Ambassador Shankar, as far as economic cooperation is concerned, and we'll come to that in just a bit. But let's first expand more on these bilateral ties and very interesting points that you've shared on the shared history of the two countries, Ambassador Sajjanhar. But given that no Prime Minister has visited Austria in the past 40 years, where does Austria really now figure in our foreign policy? Of course, there is the background of the war playing out in Gaza and, of course, Ukraine and Russia. But help us understand, how does Austria going forward figure in our foreign policy?
You know, in addition to what you and Ambassador Meera Shankar mentioned, you know, Austria projects itself as a neutral country on the European stage, on the European theater. And in that context, it feels that it has a very important role to play in terms of resolution of conflicts. It is true that Austria is a neutral country militarily, but it is not a neutral country politically. And politically, by and large, it shares the position of the European Union, and it follows the actions that the European Union has taken in terms of imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation, stopping import of oil and gas and other energy from Russia. So in that sense, Austria feels it has a role that is somewhat different from other European countries to play in terms of bringing peace to this war-fraught region. And India has a greater role to play because India is possibly, over the last few years, emerged as a partner of choice for a large number of countries, most of the countries in the world. And it has also emerged as a bridge between the East and the West. I don't think that there is any other country which is so large, which is so economically, politically, militarily, which is so important, which can play such a very important role. So I think that is what the Austrian Chancellor Nehammer, he focused on, that both India and Austria could use their respective strengths to try and bring peace to Europe in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Sumita.
You know, and that remains to be seen. How can both the countries really bring the element of peace? And that was lauded by Chancellor as well, Nehammer, as you rightly said, Ambassador Sajjanhar. But Ambassador Meera Shankar, I want to get from you the message that India is giving out with this outreach. We also saw the Prime Minister's earlier engagements at G7, wherein he met leaders of G7 countries, held talks with them. Then he met President Putin, and now he's meeting, Austrian premiers. Do you agree with Ambassador Sajjanhar that perhaps it really reflects on India's growing stature as a global power, given that that Austria is going into elections this year?
I think that, India's weight in global affairs is rising commensurate with the growth of its economy and the growth of its influence overall. So I would say that yes, India today carries more weight because we are the fifth largest economy in the world in real terms, and we hope to become the third largest economy. We are a democracy, and we act as a bridge between, Russia and the Western world, and also between the developing countries and the developed world, the global south and the developed world. So India is a country which faces many ways. It's not in one block or the other. It is a country which combines a stance which enables it to deal with various, groupings.
Right, 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 right. And this is what, India has attempted as far as getting together. Issues of the global south have also been concerned. We're completely out of time, Ashok Sajjanhar, but let me get the final comments from you on where do you see convergences building up for both the countries. The Prime Minister, of course, spoke about Make in India program, digital public infrastructure, startups, and of course, a green economy, and how Austria perhaps could leverage its status today in the world, given that it is on its way to become the third largest economy. But where do you see convergences, realistic convergences building up between both the countries, and what can India hope to achieve out of these?
No, of course, economy and trade and collaboration, I think that is the way to go forward. And that's what the Prime Minister projected also, that India's skills, India's growing market, the initiatives that India has taken, whether it is in the area of startups or it is in the area of public digital infrastructure, or many other areas, production linked incentives. So the environment, economic environment in India is very good, and Austria has great expertise, innovation, creativity, technology, water management, green energy. So these are areas where both the countries have their respective strengths, and they can pool their respective strengths to bring together, and that will be beneficial for both the countries. For instance, supply chains, where there has become a problem as far as supply chains from China are concerned. So definitely India can also step into that role. India can step into that particular position. So I think there are a number of complementarities which the two sides have discussed. And if you see the program also in Austria, in Vienna, there has been considerable focus on the economic exchanges and economic partnership, how to take this forward, how to take our engagement forward in this area. And I think today we have about 3 billion euros of bilateral trade, 2 billion euros of investment.
Right.
And I think definitely this can be taken forward, taken up to a much higher level.
Yes, and it remains to be seen, Ambassador Shankar and Ambassador Sajjanhar, on how this partnership can be forged further, can be taken further, and trade ties be leveraged. On that note, thank you very much, Ambassador Shankar and Ambassador Sajjanhar, for joining us on India.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.